Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the first of our monthly educational series. We're really excited to kick the series off to share our passion about GP and hopefully get you guys re-energized with the product and, using it to its full capabilities. So with that being said, today we're going to talk about best practices around reconciling your balance sheet accounts. And really we're talking about the subledgers, AR, AP, inventory, your bank module. So a couple of housekeeping items, I'll call them. First off, you want to make sure before you start reconciling, obviously, any of your balance sheet accounts, we need to make sure all our GL batches are posted. The second thing I always recommend is check in the batch recovery window to make sure there aren't any stranded transactions out there that could be causing, a potential imbalance. So you want to get all of that straightened up before you kind of dive in. So typically what we recommend is comparing the historical aged trial balance. There is a historical age trial balance for AR, for AP, and the HITB report, the historical inventory trial balance report. Those are the three reports that we recommend that you run each month. That should tie to your GL number. Most of the time it does, hopefully. But what if there's an imbalance? You can spend a lot of time going down rabbit holes trying to find the differences and where they could occur. So we are going to walk through a demo and I'll show you some of the, potential pitfalls or where things can kind of get out of whack. So we're also going to look at using an account roll-up to quickly look at a range of accounts. It'll give you a balance. So for example, I have multiple inventory GL accounts. I want to see one lump sum number across all the inventory accounts. So we'll look at that as well as a tool to help you guys reconcile. So like I said, you'll run the historic trial balance reports, match them to the GL. If there is a discrepancy, the first tool that we always go to is the Reconcile to GL report. And I'll show you that here in a second. So the Reconcile to GL report is found in your financial, on your financial area page under the routine section, Reconcile to GL. And once you run the report, it spits out an Excel report that is broken into three major sections: the unmatched section, the potentially matched transactions, and then the matched transactions. So I am going to, let me end this for now and minimize it and hop over to GP. So like I said, on the financial area page, under the routine section, I'm going to go down to Reconcile to GL. You notice in the list here, I can run this for payables, receivables, inventory, and bank reconciliation. So I want to mention bank reconciliation first, because when you do the bank rec in GP, what you are reconciling is your bank statement to the checkbook module in GP. However, you're not necessarily reconciling to the cash GL account. And so that's where this bank reconciliation piece comes into play, because it will reconcile or show you any differences between your checkbook module and your cash GL account balance. And so that one's a little bit different. We are going to start with AP. So I'm going to run the payables management. I'm going to run it for the end of my month. So let's say I'm doing April year-end close or month-end. You notice I only have one AP account here in my company. If you have multiple AP accounts, you can list them here and it will total all your AP accounts up. My company, I only have one. So the first thing I need to do before I can run this is I need to select where my output file is going to go. So I'm going to click on the folder and I'm just going to save it out to my desktop here. And then I'm going to click process. So here we go. You notice I have several transactions in my unmatched transactions section. So this is where I would obviously start, you know, because I'm assuming that I am out of balance. So one of the things I wanted to point out is I can highlight on any of these blue fields here, I can highlight and it will take me back. So one of the transactions that is causing me to be out of balance, you notice how the spreadsheet is set up. On the left-hand side is all of the transactions that have been posted to the payables module. And then on the right-hand side are all of the transactions that have posted to my AP GL account throughout the month. And so obviously you want to see things match. When they don't match, we have to figure out why. So I'm going to start with what hit the GL over here that isn't showing up in my payables module. So I'm going to click on the journal entry number here. This box is going to pop up. I'll say yes. And what that does is it opens the window, the corresponding journal entry window in GP. So from here, things look normal. I have something that hit the AP account and an expense account. Notice the transaction date here. But I'm going to drill back on the payable here. Again, everything looks normal. I'm going to look at the document date to verify what happened. And here is where things got out of whack. So the posting date is actually 12/31/2028 and not my document date. So this transaction posted to the payables module into the future. I think what happened, because the GL also hit February or April of 2027, somebody must have corrected the financial transaction before it posted there. So, you know, if a document gets coded to a wrong date, that could throw the GL and, in this case, the AP module out of balance. Also, so that you're aware, there is, under the Professional Services Tools library, there is a tool called the Doc Date Verify tool. If you enable that tool in GP, it will prohibit you from using a bad transaction date in payables and receivables. So that is something that we recommend everybody turn on, because that could help you know, you down the road if you have bad transaction dates and that's causing some of your imbalances. Back to this window for a minute. What we typically recommend, you notice that I ran this for April, but my beginning balance subledger is out too, meaning that there are transactions you know, that caused me to be out of balance in April, but this problem has gone back prior months. So what I always recommend is running this back for prior months and finding out where you the first month where things got out of whack, and then working your way forward. So if it started, let's say 2 months ago in February, I would go and you know, try to figure out what happened in February and then move on to March and then back to April. versus trying to work backwards. It seems to work better if you go back to the beginning and try to move forward. So I'm going to now run this for receivables. Same thing, I'm going to do this for April. Here I'm going to look up my receivables number because I didn't save it. So here it is. Again, I'm going to browse out and save this just on my desktop. Now you can, I will mention, run this for multiple months. So I could do from January to April. And you could try to also reconcile that way. Sometimes there's a ton of transactions to weed through, and we found it's easier to break it down into months. But, you know, some people prefer to just do it all at once, so you can do it either way. All right, so here's my receivable. So you notice, again, to the left is all of the transactions that have been posted to my receivables module throughout the month of April. And then on the right-hand side are the general ledger transactions that have been posted to my 1200 receivables AR account, GL account. So here again, I have another transaction that is causing me to be out of balance. This time I'm going to click on the receivable transaction. So I'm going to click on the sales document number here. And that does open again the window in GP, so it takes me right to the transaction. Again, this one looks normal on the outside. Let's look at the date to make sure it's not any kind of date issue. That looks good. I'm going to go down to my distributions. Oh, this receivable line here should be my 1200 AR account. So somebody has accidentally overwritten that and actually put the sales number in there. So that is what's causing me to be out of balance. It hit the receivables module, but it did not hit my 1200 account when it was posted. So that's another common occurrence of where things can get out of whack. Somebody overrides the payable or receivable distribution line, or, you know, the sales line, they repeat it. So either way, and that tends to throw things out of whack, obviously. Again, my receivables subledger was out of balance for the beginning balance, so I would want to track it back and figure out where it first got out of whack. I'm going to close some of these real quick. So let's look at the bank one now. This one you run by picking the actual checkbook. So I'm going to pick my Uptown Trust. Again, I'm going to run this for April. For this bank, there's not like a historical trial balance report that you can run, but what I typically recommend is every month running the checkbook balance inquiry, because this will show you, here's your current checkbook balance, here's your current cash GL account balance. These two should be in sync, obviously, all the time. If they're not, even if you're reconciling your bank statements in GP each month, then you'll want to come run this reconciliation report because something is off between my cash GL account and my checkbook balance. Again, I'm going to save the Excel report out there, and I'm going to click process. So you can do this for each checkbook separately. Here, there's a ton of transactions. And so what this looks like is these are all receivables payments. There was no deposit done in my bank account. So once I do a deposit in my checkbook, these two then should match up. But this is, I've received, so when you do a cash receipt in GP, each cash receipt updates the general ledger, but the cash receipts don't show up in your checkbook until you actually do the deposit, the bank deposit. And so that's what's causing me to be off here. Again, I can click on one of these transactions if I wanted to look at it, and it will open that up for me here. Again, I can drill back and review the information there. So something to keep in mind, because I know a lot of people are surprised, well, I reconcile my bank statement every month, but it is important to run the checkbook balance and make sure that the cash GL account is in sync. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the account roll-up. So like I mentioned earlier, the account roll-up is a way to group, in this case, my inventory accounts, because if you look at my chart of accounts here, I have a lot of inventory accounts that, and so if I were to run the historic inventory trial balance report, it's going to give me a total across all the inventory GL accounts. So in order for me to be able to match quickly, you could run the management reporter balance sheet, or you can run this account roll-up. So you notice over here, right now I'm displaying the net change. I can change that to period balance. And so this right here for period 4, this is my balance, my inventory balance across all of my inventory accounts. And if I want to see what makes up this number, I can click on column heading, and it shows me here are all the accounts in my range that actually have a balance. And then I can even go in further, and it takes me to the detail inquiry screen for that particular account. So you notice right now it's just looking at the accounts that have balances, but if I want to see all the accounts I have included in my roll-up here, I can select this include zero balance. And now it's showing me, here's my full list of inventory accounts that I have included in this roll-up. So again, I find this useful for reconciling things like inventory, because there are usually more than one inventory account in many systems. So again, this should match, in this case, my historical inventory trial balance report. This report, I do want to mention, is the standard report that you tie inventory to GL with. it used to be that people would use the historical stock status report, but what they found was some of those amounts on that report changed, and so GP came out with the historical inventory trial balance report, where you can run it historically and the number is the same. It doesn't change based on future activity like the historical stock status. Also, another caveat, if you guys have been on GP for many, many years, there is a process you have to go through to actually turn on and enable the HITB report. So if you need help with that, please feel free to reach out and ask. So I'm going to go to purchasing real quick, and I'm going to pull up the trial balance report, the historical one that I'm talking about. And I want to talk about a few of the options here. So when we are using this to initially run and look at our GL balance, what we always recommend is here we enter our date. What do I want to run this through? I'm going to pick the end of April. And we always recommend select transactions for the report using the GL posting date. So that's important because document date will give you a different total on the report. So I'm just going to run this. I did run it in detail. You can run it obviously in summary. I don't have that many transactions out here. I'm lucky. So this due amount, this $1,837,647.28, that is what my GL account balance should be. And so where we always start is I just go to the summary and the inquiry summary. I tried to be smart. And so here for period 4, I'm way off. Now I do notice that I don't have beginning balance, so perhaps I didn't close the year and my balances didn't roll forward. So that's probably why I'm so out of balance. But this is always where we start. So this report here should match, the balance for the period here. So we have just a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions they want to type out? Or if you are trying to reconcile something and you're stuck, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help, give you some pointers, or we can walk through it with you, or, do it for you if you're in some kind of time crunch. So feel free to reach out and let us help. I am going to go back to our slideshow. Yeah. Okay. So we have a few more educational series coming up before the end of the year. We've got, in September, we've got Speed Up Reporting with Management Reporter. October, we're going to be talking about saving time running your smart list favorites in Excel. November, we will talk about streamlining your bank reconciliations. And then January 2020, we'll talk about quick and easy ways to find your data within GP. After, as we get closer to year end, we'll put together a schedule for sessions for the following year. But I hope that you guys come back and join us again for our next one. There is a registration link here, which Brad will be providing out at the end of this session. And I will turn this back over to Brad now so he can talk more about the summer special that we're offering that he had mentioned at the beginning of our session.
Thanks, Diane. Yep, and we did get a few questions too, so we'll get to the Q&A session here in just a second. But I just wanted to remind everybody that we've got the summer special going on. You can sign up by August 30th to lock this in, and then there are additional promotions and terms that are to be looked at after that. But then if you want to look at some great ways to take advantage of this offer, you can do things like purchase some support hours to be used for the remainder of 2019, upgrade to the latest version of GP, implement Power BI, or even implement additional things into Dynamics GP, such as fixed assets, EFT, or human resources. Just ask us. There's lots of things that can be done with this promotion. Almost any project or service or support can be applied for it. So if you got something in mind or something that your team has wanted to have done for a long time but just haven't gotten around to, just let us know, and we'll try to apply this for it. So let's go ahead and get the questions answered here. We did get a handful. Stacy's asking, how do you remedy the situation if incorrect dates are used in payables?
So there's a few things we can do. If it's one or two transactions, a lot of times what we recommend, if possible, is to void those transactions and re-enter them with the correct dates. I know sometimes that's not possible. So then it's maybe we create, we can go into the back end to SQL to fix the dates if needed, which we've had to do before too. So it depends. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Like I said, we start out with, can we void the transaction? If we can't, then we go on and perhaps just fix it via SQL if we need to.
Okay. And then the next question is from Ellen. How do you fix a bad date or a bad account?
So good question. Again, if at all possible, we always recommend that you void, if you find a transaction that's causing the difference and it can be voided, let's void it and enter it correctly. I know that sometimes that works, sometimes it's already been partially applied, or there's, things and you just can't void it. Then we recommend, again, we don't typically go into SQL as a first resort. That's always a last resort. So I always start with, can we void the transaction? I would start there and then continue the conversation. There's several other things we can look at doing before we get to the fix in SQL. And that, like I said, is always our very last resort.
Okay. And Kimmer asks, I am not seeing the account roll up in the financial inquiry section. Can you verify where to find this?
Yep. Let me end this and go back to so it is found on the financial page under inquiry, account roll-up. So it could be maybe you just don't have security access if you don't see it here. But that's where it should be.
Okay. And then Laura is asking, can you explain again how to control posting dates to prevent errors?
So my favorite tool for controlling posting dates is to go to the professional services tools and turn on the doc date verify tool. We can send out the instructions for doing this. Typically when you need to use one of the professional services tools, you need to be logged in as SA. And then we can send you the instructions for turning this on, or, we can turn it on for you if you want. But that is, I would recommend everybody turn that on, because you will get warnings that say, hey, this is a bad date, big flashing sign, to kind of warn you. Because sometimes, you're hand keying in and you don't pay attention, and then it goes into a future period and causes problems.
Okay, and then Rose asks, how do we eliminate potentially matched transactions so we don't see them again on another report?
So good question. Typically, when you run that reconciled to GL for a month, it's only pulling the transactions for that specific month. So the same transaction shouldn't show up over and over again. What GP is matching in that reconcile report, it's matching the document number, the amount, the date is specifically what it's looking at. And to go further, what it's really looking at here, let me just start this so I can explain it. It's really looking at everything that has hit this pay line. It's what's driven off the pay line here, and then the GL account on the right-hand side. But when you run that reconciled to GL, it should just be that month's postings that show up. So the same transactions shouldn't show up month after month, if that makes sense.
Okay, and then Melissa asks, we run Cinch as an add-on for grain purchasing, that's C-I-N-C-H. Will this reconcile option work for reconciling those transactions?
So we have several clients that use Cinch, and it will still reconcile receivables, payables, but there aren't extra reconciliations for some of the Cinch data reports, because I know there's a lot of additional data that's captured in Cinch that's not standard GP. But what it does capture is any of the Cinch data that flows to the purchasing or payables module, and any data that flows to the receivables or sales module in GP, that then gets picked up in this reconciliation.
Okay. And Annie's asking, can you show where to find the account roll-up again? That might have been, actually, we might have already answered that in the previous question as well, but.
So again, it's on the financial page under the inquiry section, account roll-up.
Okay. And then could you do a journal entry fix, or let's see, could you do a JE fix to the bad date amount? Sorry, I'm not sure what that acronym is exactly.
You could do a journal entry. So if a transaction posted to the GL in a wrong period, you could do some kind of reversing entry to put the amount in the right period, and then make sure it reverses out, in the month that it originally posted in. So you could do that. Sometimes we do use journal entries to clean this up. Again, it's not a one size fits all, because, each situation could be a little bit unique. But yeah, it's definitely a possibility.
Okay, and then Ann asks, do these adjustments hit the GL?
What adjustments?
Oh, let's see. Oh, that was part 2 of a different question. Do increase/decrease adjustments in bank rec hit the GL?
Yes. Yes. So what hits the general ledger in banking? That's a great question. So if you're in the bank transaction entry window and you do a check type, a withdrawal, an increase or decrease adjustment, these hit the general ledger right away. So if you're doing an increase adjustment, it will show up as an increase adjustment, in your checkbook. If you change this and you do an enter receipt, this is going to act the same as a cash receipt in receivables. And so this will also hit the GL right away, but this will not show up in your checkbook until you do a bank deposit to group those receipts together.
Okay, and also when an AP is voided, do we change the posting date to date of the void?
Yes. When you void a transaction, whether it's open or historical, you notice you have the void date and the posting date. This is a great question and something we should talk about as well. So if I wanted to void this particular transaction, you notice that my initial dates go back to when the transaction was originally entered. I can override that and change it to current month, which a lot of times we recommend because, this is going back to 2013. I'm in 2027 now. So it's 2023 to 4 years ago. Let me also explain this. The void date is the date that the transaction will fall off of the historical age trial balance report. The posting date is the date that it's going to come off of the general ledger or come out of the GL account balance. So I recommend you make these dates the same. And if it's, a couple of years prior, I would recommend making both dates, the current month, so that they fall off at the same time and you don't have some kind of mismatch. And also so you're not posting to 2 years ago because GP will not like that.
Okay, and then Ellen asks, why would they be potentially matched versus an actual match? Or why would they be a potential match versus an actual match?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The potentially matched section, as it's going through and looking at the transactions that hit the payable module versus what hit the GL, if it can find 2 or 3 of the criteria that it uses to match transactions, it will throw it in the potentially matched section. Typically, we don't find problems in the potentially matched section. So the match section is all 4 or 5 of the criteria that they use to match these transactions between the module and the GL fall in the match section. Potentially matched is it hits 2 or 3 of the criteria, but not all 4 or 5. And then obviously the unmatched section is it can't find any relatable information between the transactions. So that's how it's broken out.
Okay, and then Ann asks, so when a check is voided, is that the same answer as the AP void?
Yes. Yes, same thing. If it's a payable check, again, you'd be voiding a historical transaction here in the payables module. So these would be the vendor payments. And if you're voiding a bank transaction, you would go here and pick your date. So here, this is driven by, this will also default to the original transaction date. Let me pull something up so we can look at that. Yeah, did you see that? Let me do that again, just so that I make sure everybody saw that. If I try to void here a check, first it's going to tell you this transaction was entered in payables management, so please void that there. This message is driven by setups in the GL and in the payables module. So typically we like to follow that rule. If you cut the check in payables, void it in payables, don't try to void it here. But you notice it does also go back and update the transaction date to the original transaction date. So here you would override it here.
Okay, and that is it for the questions at this time. Diane, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we hop off here?
I don't think so at this time, but please, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or need help with anything. We're happy to help. And thank you guys so much for joining us today. And we look forward to meeting back up this time next month.